Hoping you're enjoying your dinner tonight, and it is an honor and privilege to be here to be able to just share a little bit about my life. But first, before I share anything, I just want to congratulate Rebecca and all those who have supported, worked with, donated toward the work of Access. I congratulate you in your 10-year anniversary. 10 years is no small feat, so really thank you for all that you've done. I'm really thankful and really honored to be here tonight to be able to share with you some things that I've gone through in my own life, and be able to share my life with you, especially when it comes to emotional health and also maybe even happiness. I'm definitely no expert in either of those areas, but excuse me, just getting stuck in my throat. But definitely not an expert in either of those areas, but I do have some experience in those things, and I've done a little bit of reading and some research on those things that have helped me to try to overcome some of the things that we go through in what we call life. I'm definitely not a special person, and probably the most ordinary, boring, non-special person that you'll probably ever meet. But you know what? I'm okay with that. And so, but before I go on, what I really want you to know, and what I want to be able to say to you tonight, is that it's going to be okay. Could you do me a favor, and can you kind of repeat after me? It's going to be okay.
It's going to be okay.
Thank you. That's really good. Turn to your neighbor and just say to them, if you can do me another favor, it's going to be okay. Great, wow, that was awesome. I really appreciate that. It's going to be okay. It really is going to be okay. Although I didn't always think that way. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, and I think I'm pessimistic by nature. I always saw the cup as kind of half empty, and I was a big time complainer. I complained about everything, I judged everything, and I was really bad in that area. And but I've had my share of troubles where I knew or where I felt like things were not going to be okay. Like this one time when I was in 3rd, maybe 4th grade, our school, I think it was through my school, we went on a field trip, I guess to a local swimming pool. Back then, I think we were able to go to a swimming pool. And when we were changing to go swimming, I didn't realize, or I forgot, this is a true story. I didn't realize that I had my red fire engine truck underwear that my mom had bought on me. And so I was trying to keep it very discreet, but someone found out, they told everybody else, and I just thought at that moment things were not going to be okay as a 3rd grader. On a more serious note, when I was 27, my dad passed away from pancreatic cancer. And that was a very difficult time in my life, because that was probably the first family member that had died that I knew personally. And my dad was a minister. He was a minister for a long time. And I didn't quite understand that, because to me it was kind of confusing, because he was a man who had given his life to God, serving, and then he had to end his life with such pain and agony, and he almost died in a very undignified way. And I was very confused at that point, and I almost came to the point where I began to question my faith in God. And at that point in time in my life, I was not okay. A year later, my grandmother, who was my favorite person in the world, I loved her to death, more than my parents, that's why I loved her even more than my parents. And she was very special to me. She suddenly died of pneumonia the following year. I had an emotional breakdown in the hospital. And at that moment, I did not feel like things were going to be okay. And one thing I come to realize when it comes to life, well, there's a person that always comes to my mind when I think about life. And some of you might know him, some of you might not. The younger persons might not know him. But his name is Mr. T. You guys know Mr. T? You know, I pity fool. You know, whenever I think about life, I always kind of think about him in some ways, because the image of him kind of always reminds me of the things that we go through life. And so I have a little video clip here of Mr. T. So if I were to ask Mr. T, what is your prediction on life if you were to describe life? Mr. T, what would your prediction be? They get to click on the picture, yeah. What would your prediction be? Oh, you can't go right here. Well, Eagles prediction, pain. Well, pain. You know, we all go through it to some degree or another. We all experience it everyone experiences it some way or another. One of my counseling professors, as I went through counseling school, what he said was that mental illness comes in 3 sizes. It's like you're going to a fast food restaurant and you get 3 sizes. And mental illness is sort of like the same way. It comes in small, medium, and large. And it comes from the very minor to the very major, full-blown kind of mental illness. And I think pain comes similar, in a similar fashion. It comes either small, medium, large. There's some pain that, it's easy to get through, but then there's some pain in your life that we all experience, or some of us experience, that it's just a little bit too difficult for us to bear. And so I think pain comes in those 3 ways. And when we experience pain, it kind of messes up our lives a little bit because it's not something we want in our lives. And it causes hurt in our lives, and we don't want to experience that. And I don't know about you, but I hate hurt. I don't like feeling like experiencing the hurt in my life. And so I believe the way that we handle our lives, when we experience the pain, the way that we handle the pain, or the way that we go through life with these things in our lives, will determine our level of happiness, or health, or emotional health, because I believe they're somehow tied to one another in the way that we handle it. A couple of years ago, I went through my midlife crisis. And actually, I think I'm still going through my midlife crisis. But during this time, I really began to doubt myself. I began to doubt my abilities. I began to doubt who I am, my identity. Am I American? Am I Korean? Am I Asian? And there are all these questions that went through my mind. And I was so uncertain about life. I was really struggling with that area. And the next picture that I want to show you sort of symbolizes how my life has been. This picture, maybe you might be able to identify it. My life felt like a little maze. I felt like I was going one way, but then as I made that turn, I felt like I made the wrong turn. So I had to backtrack a little bit, and then I was going down another way. Just when I thought I was going the right way, I hit a wall. And that was kind of like my life for a couple of years, actually. Just not feeling like, feeling like I was going through a maze. And some of you might have gone through that, some of you might be going through that right now, some of you might be going through, maybe it's a little bit worse, like this next picture that I have up here. It feels like a little bit like that. I was just going through all this, and I felt like I really didn't know where I was going. And these days, it just feels like life has become more complicated. I don't know if you feel that way, but I feel like life has become a little bit more complicated, maybe a little bit more confusing. There's so many choices out there. Relationships that go sour. Maybe you don't know where your life is headed, and you feel a little bit confused. If you know what you're doing, or you feel like you know what you're doing, consider yourself lucky, you're blessed, because I think you're one of the very few that maybe even feel that way. But in my midlife crisis, I started questioning everything. I didn't know where to turn. I felt like I was just going down a drain. I was serving as a pastor in a particular church some time ago, and it was probably the darkest time in my life. I actually went through a very deep depression, to the point where I was, again, doubting my abilities. I felt like I was losing control. I was beginning to lose hope in my life. I was beginning to lose hope in my faith. I started, believe it or not, I just even started thinking, I couldn't stop thinking of how I could even end my life. It was a really difficult and dark time, and I don't recommend that to your worst enemy. It was just something that you don't ever want to have to go through, but it was something that I was personally going through for many various, for many various reasons. I was not healthy emotionally, I was not happy, and I did not feel like I was going to be okay. I finally turned to a mental health professional. I too grew up in an Asian culture, and I thought maybe counseling was not the way to go. I particularly feel for it. I thought maybe if I just pray more or if I seek God more, maybe that would solve my answers. To which I did. I mean, don't get me wrong, I didn't do that. Not that I didn't do those things. But it came to the point where I think I needed to seek professional help. And so with prayer and with support and with, just turning to God, and believe it or not, you may not agree with this, but even with medication, I was able to get through. I was on my road to recovery. I still struggle every once in a while here and there, but I was able to get through it, and it was really tough. It was just again, like what I said before, that I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. But I believe it was through this dark time that I went through that I was able to, after reflecting upon that time, that I was able to learn a few things, and that's part of kind of what I want to share with you this evening, very briefly. Some of the things that I've learned to kind of help me through those difficult times, whether your pain is a minor one, or whether your pain is something that's too hard for you to bear alone. Some of the things that I went through and have experienced for myself, I want to just be able to share with you tonight, real quick. It's nothing profound, probably something that you might already know, but for me, it's something that I need to remind myself all the time, because when you start getting older and when your memory starts to fail, I need to remind myself of these things over and over again to kind of help me get through the tough times. So one of the things, if not the main thing that I kind of want to share with you, not only everything's going to be okay or it's going to be okay, but really what I want to be able to share is that something that kind of helped me through all the difficulties after I kind of reflected upon it was that life is about transitions. If I could just sum it up all tonight, is if we look at the way that we look at our lives, life is transitions. Life is all about transitions. I came across this book that was very helpful for me to understand a lot of things that I was going through, whether it was through my midlife crisis, whether it was going through the difficulties that I was going through. It all kind of made sense as I was going through this book, and it was actually called Transitions, and it's an author written by William Bridges. And if you ever get a chance to read it, it's a very excellent book. And it came at a right time for me as I was going through the certain struggles throughout my life, especially as I was going through my struggles. So basically, what he was saying and what I've come to agree with, and as I kind of practice some of the things that I've learned from all the struggles that I've gone through, is that life is all about transitions. And whether you realize it or not, we all go through it. We all go through transitions. That life, if you can think about it, is one big transition from birth to death. Or from adolescence to puberty, from the high school student to the college student, to the college world, to the working world, to being single, to being married. It's all transitions, from having no children to children, getting a divorce or losing a loved one in death. We all experience the transitions. And I think once we begin to understand that, then we begin to understand how we can deal with some of the pain or some of the difficulties that come along with some of these transitions. Some of the transitions might be easy, but some of them not so much. So anything new that comes into your life is a transition that we need to deal with. Some are painful, some are not so painful. And the way that we deal with it will help us to succeed in life as we live it. And if you're not sure how to handle the transition that you're in, or if you feel like you're stuck, or you feel like you just don't know where to go or where to turn, what you have to do in understanding transitions is that you gotta have to look as the end as the beginning. You gotta look to the end as the beginning. And what I mean by that is that we don't start from the beginning of a transition and then try to figure out along the way. But when we think about transitions, is that we have to think about the end. And what I mean by that is that we gotta kind of take a step back, or we gotta look back and try to see what it was or how we dealt with the things in the past that will help us to be able to deal with things in the future. And that's why counseling is so important, because it helps us to do that. Some of us can kind of figure out that on our own. But that's why counseling is so important, or that's why we turn to even a friend or someone who has a little bit more wisdom than we do, to be able to kind of take a step back, look back at our lives, and to see how we dealt with things in the past, to be able to look to the future and to be able to live successfully in that. When I was working as a chaplain, here at Gwinnett Medical Center in Gwinnett County, this idea of transition also helped me to understand this. When I started working as a chaplain at the hospital, it was probably one of the most difficult times, one of the hardest places to work at, because you're dealing with so much stress, you're dealing with so much tension in that kind of environment. You're going to the emergency room and meeting patients who have gone through some sort of crisis on their own. There was one time where there was an innocent teenager that was taken to the hospital. What had happened was that he had turned in for the night, and he was actually shot by a stray bullet from people who were kind of just shooting around right in front of his house because of an argument. So they brought him to the hospital, and when he came to the hospital, he was pronounced dead. Now imagine you have to go and tell the parents that this 11-year-old kid was shot and had died. And so my job was to bring the doctor into the room where the parents were and to be able to break the bad news that their son had made it. And so the doctor came in, he told them that their son didn't make it, and of course the parents went ballistic. And doctors aren't good at taking this kind of news or the reaction, so he just left, and that's why we have chaplains. We're there to kind of help console the inconsolable. We're there, but being that was my first time, that was one of my, being a beginner chaplain, as he left, I was like, oh, gee, thanks. And I was there, stuck with trying to console the inconsolable. And situations at the hospital were frequent, and situations like that were frequent. There were crisis after one after another. And eventually, after experiencing all those things, I started to not be okay. It started to take its toll on me. I didn't want to go into the rooms anymore, and I didn't really know why. People were saying to me, like some of my colleagues, they said, "You're probably afraid." I said, well, that could be part of it, but I felt like there was something more. And part of the training when you go through counseling, that helped me to realize that life is all about transitions, and trying to understand that. We go through a process of where we try to understand what we're going through and be able to talk it out into write and to reflect on the things that we go through. And so while I was a chaplain, I felt like I was stuck. My heart was there. I wanted to go into the room, but a lot of times I just kind of wanted to stop short and just not go in because of whatever reason. I couldn't quite understand it. And so one of the things that I've learned that has been helpful for me in order to move on or to move forward is this one concept. When you feel stuck, is this one concept that's called self-awareness. It's sort of like a self-reflection where you kind of take a situation and you try to see, why am I going through what I'm going through? What are the feelings that I'm having inside? Is there anything in the past that's making me feel this way in the present that's affecting my life for the future? And so I had a chance to be able to do that. And by practicing this, it actually helped me to process and to understand some of the struggles that I was going through as a chaplain, and even in my own life, to be able to look at the present and to be able to look at the past of why I'm feeling what I'm feeling at the present, and to be able to move toward the future. So what I discovered was a whole plethora of things to help me to understand why I was so hesitant about going into the room to meet the patient. And so these were some of the things that affected me in terms of going into the room. One of them was growing up in a Korean culture. Culture, I'm not quite sure how it might be in other Asian cultures, but in the Korean culture, my parents told me to be submissive. You have to be passive. Don't be aggressive. Just stay quiet. And so I always felt inferior because that was the kind of custom that I grew up in. And so when I felt that way, every time I went into the room, I just felt like I had to be submissive. I had to be passive, and that was kind of my mindset. Another one was trust issues. I had a hard time trusting people. And that's partly because I grew up in New York. And in New York, you don't ever trust anybody. Ever. And so when I first moved to Georgia, it was like a culture shock to me because people, they're so friendly here in Georgia. And sometimes they would just come up to you and say hello. And when somebody ever said that, the neighborhood that I lived in, people would just wave or say hello. And when they did that, I would just kind of turn around and say, are you saying hello to me? I was not used to that. And then when they said hello to me, I would just start asking questions of, well, why are you saying hello to me? Is there something that you want from me? Are you trying to tell me something? That's just my nature. And so I just didn't trust people. And so, when you come across a New Yorker, it's not because we're unfriendly. It's just because we don't trust you. That's it. That's just the issue. We don't, it's not that we're not friendly. We really are, but we just don't trust you. And so these are some of the things that I came to realize as I worked as a chaplain. I began to realize these things that have happened in the past affect me in the way that it is right here in the present. But unless I change some of the things that have kind of hindered me, I cannot move successfully into the future. And so I started working on being more assertive. I started working on trusting a little bit more. And to this day, it's helped me not just in the hospital room, but it has also helped me in other areas of my life as well. And so this is why the practice of self-awareness or self-reflection is so important, because it helps us to understand what we've experienced in the past, to understand what we're going through here in the present, to help us to be successful in the future. This is why, as I began to understand and learn about transitions, this is why I love reading the Bible so much, or reading about the Bible stories, because we see character after character, story after story about people who've gone through certain transitions. And I can identify with so many of them because it seems like they've kind of gone through the same thing. There were people who either felt like they were afraid or they felt like they weren't qualified, but yet God continued to use them and teach them to be able to move forward. We have characters like Moses, who we all know was a murderer and a fugitive, but God used him as a great leader of a nation. We have David, who committed adultery and fell from grace. But the Psalms are filled with reflections of what he's done, all the things that he's done in confession and asking for forgiveness and praise and all these other things, his reflections in the Psalms, that was helping him to be more self-aware as he went through these things, as he was trying to lead as king. We have also the Apostle Paul, who was a highly educated teacher of the law, but who was violent in persecuting Christians, and jailing them, and doing whatever he can to kind of squash the Christian movement. But yet God used him to help him to know what it meant to be a Christian, as one being chosen to be the very mouthpiece of God. We see character after character, story after story within the Bible who've gone through these transitions in their own lives to help us to understand the life that we all go through on a daily basis, to be able to help us to achieve some sort of happiness or even health, emotionally speaking. I guess I kind of conclude with this. When it comes to life, well, how many of you seen the movie Forrest Gump? Forrest Gump, a pretty well-known movie. And we all know the famous line. Forrest Gump once said, "Life is like a box of chocolates, right? You never know what you're going to get out." Maybe, it's a good analogy. But I think life is a little bit more different. I think life is a little bit more like dancing. And as we come to this 10th celebration, I think we can look at life as like dancing a little bit. And so every situation you find yourself in, or every relationship that you have, it's kind of like a dancing encounter with somebody else. You're going to be encountering them, and it's just a matter of how well you're going to work with that person, or how well you're going to be able to dance with that person that's going to determine your happiness, or even your emotional health. There's another clip here I want to show you. You won't be able to hear, but some of you might be familiar with the show Seinfeld. And there's a character in there by the name of Elaine. And what's special about Elaine is that she has a very, very distinct dance move. It's not your normal dance move, okay? I don't know how well you can see it, it's not top quality video. But as you can see, people are feeling uncomfortable. It's a very awkward kind of dance. We have George kind of being disgusted right there at the end. And so life is a little bit about dancing. A lot of us, we have our own dance move, right? And in the eyes of some, it might seem like Elaine dancing. It's kind of, And when you look at that, it's like, oh, what is he doing? You know, it's not. To us, though, it seems kind of normal. Elaine was oblivious to anyone else in the room, but to everyone else, it's like, this is not normal. This is, what you're doing there is just what you feel like might be good to you, but everyone else, it doesn't. But when we think about life and the way that we encounter it, whether it be a situation or circumstance or other people, we're in that kind of a dance relationship. And until we begin to understand how we relate well with the other person that we're dancing with, you know, it's going to be hard. And once there's a cohesion that takes place, that's when we begin to feel that things are starting to work out. And so the problem with us a lot of times is that we have our own dance move, but it's not compatible with the one that we're dancing with. But as we begin and as we understand this whole process of transition, we begin to try to work with that. And when we try to understand this whole process of transition, that's when the transition becomes a little bit easier, and we begin to understand ourselves. So first, when we're dancing, we might start dancing like this, you know? And, you know, to the eyes of others, it's just like, it's very awkward, it's funny, it's like, you're not. But then, when you're dancing with another person, then it's like, okay, well, maybe what I'm doing is not right. Or maybe what I'm doing is kind of funny in the eyes of others. Maybe I need to change myself a little bit. And then that's where the transition begun, we begin to see the change. And so instead of dancing like this, maybe I just need to move a little bit slower. Maybe I need to just put my arm around the person and then have that person kind of follow my lead. Or maybe I just need to start to communicate, saying, this is what I'm going to do next, and then you just kind of follow along. And this is, again, the whole process of understanding the whole idea of transition that helps us that maybe what we're doing is not the right thing, and so we need to try to make it more compatible so that as we're going through these things, it helps us to be maybe even a little bit more happy or maybe a little bit more healthier as we go along. This one last clip here is maybe an example of that. And when two people begin to dance together, it really is a wonderful thing if you really want to see this. You won't be able to hear the music, but just watch how they interact with one another. I'm not much of a dancer. In fact, I don't like dancing. When I look at this, I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. When two people are able to coordinate themselves so that they can make this beautiful arrangement of movement to be able to display something so wonderful and beautiful. And once you begin to learn to understand, or once you begin to learn how to dance in the transition of life, I believe this will lead to a more healthy, emotionally speaking, and a happy life. And that in the end, it's going to be okay. And like I said, I really do believe that God wants us to live happy and healthy lives. I really believe that from the bottom of my heart. But because of the world that we live in, sometimes that's hard for us to do, or hard for us to experience. And some of us can't make it on our own. But there's some who can. But that is why I'm thankful for an organization like ACCESS that's here for our community, that is made available for individuals who have a hard time trying to make that transition in life. Being an Asian myself, I know how hard it is to admit that maybe we do have a problem, or that we maybe don't even want to pay for counseling. But I do know that it is needed. and I know a lot of people have benefited as a result of it. So I just want to conclude by saying thank you, Rebecca, for all that you do, and for all those of you who contributed, who have worked with, volunteered, donated to Access in some way. I thank you for what you do. And my hope and prayer is that Access will continue to be an organization for this community for decades to come, helping those who go through the transition of life and encouraging them that it's going to be okay.